Welcome to My Business Matters, the Michigan Chamber podcast.
All right. Hi, I'm Sara Wurfel, the Michigan Chamber's Chief Communications and Marketing Officer, and your host today. So welcome. We are talking legislative session. The 2023 session, historic in many ways, has been one of the busiest in modern times. We're going to unpack a bit of that today, what's happened and what's on the horizon, and how that may impact our state's job providers and business climate. And we are joined by the core of our business advocacy team, or as we call them, BAT. We are joined by Wendy Block, our Senior VP of Business Advocacy and Member Engagement, Mike Alaimo, Director of Environmental and Energy Affairs, and Leah Robinson, our Director of Legislative Affairs and Leadership Programming. Lot to cover, so let's get started. Where do we go? I'm going to look at Wendy. I'm going to tee this first one up to Wendy, too. So almost 6 months into the legislative session, and I'd say it's fair that a lot has happened, almost that sea change. What have you all, starting with you, Wendy, have seen as the biggest changes in your day-to-day job and work so far?
Yeah, so good question. So this is the first time in over 40 years that we have Democratic control of the governor's office, the Michigan House, and the Michigan Senate. And so, I would say the core pieces of our jobs have remained the same: to be a strong advocate for our members in the legislative process and attending committee hearings and testifying and talking with legislators one-on-one. We're still working to kind of figure out what that all means in terms of what policy proposals are on the table. Right now, we're spending a lot of our time still building relationships with lawmakers. So, we can have good substantive conversations with folks. They know who we are. They know about our reputation. They know we read the bills and we do our homework. And then we're trying to figure out, where does the legislature really go from here? So coming off of those 6 big priorities that the Democratic leaders pushed through and have all now been signed, there's this question of where do they go from here? And do they move back more to kitchen table issues or continue to push the envelope with more of an anti-business agenda?
All right. How about you? We'll go like Mike or Leah, whoever wants to jump in next.
Just to jump on Wendy's tailcoat, it's been a busy time. I think we as the chamber have put a ton of work and effort into working to make sure that the new legislative members understand who we are and what we're here to do and work to educate them and as we always do, work through our members to promote good and better policy. And so I think what I've seen in my space for energy and environment, there are bills where we've seen commonality or alignment from the chamber and lawmakers on maybe what the goal is, but process matters, right? And so making sure that there's a deliberative stakeholder process in place where issues can be vetted. What the chamber does best is pull subject matter experts into the right room at the right time to have these policy discussions, provide that important context, and make sure that we're working through differences in a robust way. So I feel hopeful about the future, but I think it's going to be important that we continue to do the good work in this advocacy space.
Would you say, do you think they covered it, or do you have anything different where you sit, Leah?
Kind of piggybacking off of Wendy, I think as we're building these relationships and trying to gauge not only where the members are, but legislative leaders and their caucuses in terms of what they will and won't take up. So a lot of reading of bills, because we do read every bill. We know what we're talking about when we go into a situation. So I would say just making sure that we're still doing relationship building and able to gauge where the caucus might be when bills are introduced. Well,
from a side, as somebody who came from the outside world before joining the chamber, I think that's something that the team should take pride in, because people know that you know your stuff and you've paid attention to it and you actually have read the entire bill. And that's not often the case.
The entire bill.
So kind of taking a couple of comments that you guys have said and kind of transitioning that. So what would you say if you had to give a grade or just kind of a general sense of the policy work that's happened so far and the climate for job creation and economic growth in the legislature?
Yeah, so we're spending a lot of time on this and talking about, the future of Michigan's economic competitiveness and how so much hangs in the balance with some of these major policy changes that are being looked at. And, we're really at a fork in the road in terms of our economy here in Michigan. We continue to be a declining population state. We're struggling with workforce challenges, on and on, right? So we have some unique challenges ahead of ourselves and have really been talking to lawmakers about the need to address things that actually address real world challenges and to try to fill in that space and do things that are productive, not counterproductive to our longer term goals of making Michigan, continuing to have Michigan be a great place to live, work, and play. So a lot of discussion around economic development, and that has been more centered around incentives. We feel there's the need and really an opportunity to be talking about what does economic development look like that doesn't mean just handing out checks. It means having great communities. It means having a robust and talented workforce. It means that people know that Michigan is a great place to have your business, to keep your business, and to thrive.
Great. Let's actually jump ahead. I'm going to touch on, because you guys each have some policy areas that I think there have been a lot of movement in across the board. Wendy, I'm going to come back to you, but Leah, let's start. Some of the tax policy and talent issues in particular, they're going to continue to be hot topics based on just the climate of what Michigan's job providers and communities are struggling with right now. What are you hoping gets done or addressed?
So at the beginning of the legislature, or this term, we saw kind of the biggest, probably sweeping tax policy proposals that we'll see, which was the earned income tax credit, matching that to 30% of the federal credit. There was the pension tax relief for public pensions. So I think that might encapsulate our biggest sweeping proposals. And honestly, our internal tax policy committee has seen this as an opportunity to really work on taxpayer bill of rights, making it a little bit more streamlined, working with Treasury and different processes for businesses in the specific tax policy space. I'll say with economic competitiveness, as Wendy mentioned, we're a declining population. We're having a declining population, and it's not just about talent and workforce, and certainly it's a big, huge part of it, but it's economic competitiveness kind of encapsulates every different policy proposal. Energy providers want to make sure that they can work in this state and it's easy to have a business and manage a business. Labor policies matter, tax policies matter. It all encapsulates economic competitiveness. But specifically around talent, you'll see us working with Going Pro Fund, TriShare. Our members over and over and over again describe the issues that we face with childcare and affordable, accessible childcare. So you'll see us on the front lines for those conversations.
Okay, excellent. Something you mentioned I kind of think ties into Mike's policy area too, with those environmental and energy policy. Kind of started off quite quiet, and now some things are really percolating and heating up. I know you just came from committee, so what are the biggest things on your radar?
I think you're right. I mean, I think initially what we had kind of seen from the legislature was some attempts, and we're continuing to see some attempts to undo some of the things of previous legislatures. And that is concerning in its own right. I think the chamber has historically worked to put regulation and regulatory frameworks in place that make it easier to do business in Michigan as opposed to the opposite. And we have seen some attempts to kind of undo some of that. The stricter than federal policy bill is a great example, something that passed the Senate yesterday, where, now we have regulatory agencies have the ability to put into place regulations and policies that are stricter than federal. And so that just means that we could potentially be an outlier when it comes to a regulatory framework and approach. And so businesses, as the regulated community, they have to deal with a patchwork potentially of regulations and schemas that they're going to have to comply with. So that's a challenge. More recently, we've seen the legislature drop a climate bill package that frankly, some components of it don't really speak to real world economics and what is possible with today's technologies and standards. They've told us it's a starting point and place to start the conversation, and that's fine. But I'll fall back to what I said previously about process does matter. So, we're going to be at the, have a seat at the table for these discussions moving forward. We believe in a clean energy transition, but as Leah said, we believe in energy that is clean, affordable, and reliable, and you need to have all of those components be equally prioritized in policy discussions. So, we're looking forward to what the future has to hold. I think this summer is going to be a lot of work groups on a lot of different topics, and that's a good thing. But I think for us, it's really about focusing on what is economically feasible here with some of the goals we've seen.
Okay. Switching gears to another policy area, I think, Wendy, this falls squarely kind of in your kind of key area and expertise of there have been a lot of labor and employment law proposals, whether it's from independent contractors and non-compete clauses, and many that appear to have a lot of unintended consequences. What would you say has kind of been your focus right now, and what should we be paying attention to?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something we're still trying to get our arms around as well. So as you mentioned, we've seen sweeping proposals on a number of employment law changes, everything from a new test as to who can and cannot be classified as an independent contractor, which would severely limit, if not almost restrict, all types of workers from being classified as independent contractors, to an outright ban on non-compete agreements that is very similar to what we're seeing pushed from the Federal Trade Commission in Washington, D.C. We have seen legislation to create a new family leave program that would be an insurance program that all employers across the state would need to pay for, 15 weeks of paid benefits to care for yourself or a family member. And it just kind of, the list goes on and on and on. We've got a lot of those on our website at www.michamber.com under our key bills. So you can see, all of those things that we're tracking. But what we're really trying to stress with lawmakers is that a lot of these proposals have only been adopted, if they've been adopted, by a handful of states, and really could jeopardize Michigan's overall competitiveness if we try to go too far. And then, of course, we have this kind of ongoing question mark related to ongoing litigation at the Michigan Supreme Court related to Michigan's paid leave law as well as its minimum wage law. And that could really, for the restaurant industry, put that industry in a tailspin as it relates to the wage increases that could go into effect if the Supreme Court undoes or reverses a lower court decision. And the paid leave mandate piece of that could affect every employer across the state and force them to make wide-ranging and costly changes to their paid leave policies. So there's a lot of uncertainty in this category, and frankly, the words uncertainty and business don't really go too well with each other. Businesses are looking for certainty when they're looking at a given state, and so what we're trying to do is tap the brakes on a number of these things and say, hey, we would like to engage in a substantive conversation about this and help you see that these policies are maybe being pushed in the name of helping workers, but in many cases, they actually will end up hurting the very person they're intending to help. And you can think of a lot of different scenarios depending on the different bills that you're talking about. So, it's our goal to kind of come in that pragmatic problem solver lane and to have substantive conversations with lawmakers about the intended and unintended consequences associated with policy changes, and hopefully be able to shape that. With some of these, there probably isn't a landing spot, but others there very well may be, and that's going to be our goal. And to help lawmakers understand that we may be able to have policy differences on issues, but nothing is personal, right? We want to be able to come back and have a conversation about the next one, even if we have to agree to disagree on any given proposal.
You like the comments of the vote you through. I wanted to touch on one thing that we hadn't actually talked about at all, which is how actually policy from the legislative priorities of the chamber, how does that actually get set? And you mentioned policy committees. I think that might be a little surprising to a lot of folks than necessary. Can you touch on that just really briefly?
Yeah, so we're a member-driven organization. We have about 5,000 members across our state, and we have what is kind of like the legislature in a lot of ways. We have policy advisory committees within the chamber. They report up through our board of directors, and what we work on in a given legislative session is really dictated by our members through our legislative priorities. It's a compilation of those key issues that we're going to be working on in a given session with input from our members. Now, of course, we always have to be reactive, right? We don't get to decide every bill that gets introduced in the legislature in a given session. So sometimes our energy is taken away from some of those policies that were set by our members because we're being more reactionary. But it's our goal always to try to put ideas on the table and to work to get those things passed into law, and to always be member focused and member driven when we're going off to the Capitol to fight on these things. We're not making up policies. We're reflecting, our members and their positions on policies.
Yeah. So with our last question here, because that went by so fast as always, anything that we didn't cover or that our listeners should absolutely know about what's next for the rest of 2023 or the rest of the legislative session?
I would say that, as Wendy said, being reactive, things are popping up left and right. Things are moving really quickly through this legislature. So if you or your business are not already, you should be a member of the Michigan Chamber to stay up to date on everything that's happening in Lansing. Our 3 internal policy committees are Health, Human Resources, and Talent. I staff our Tax Policy and Economic Competitiveness, and Mike handles our Energy and Environment Committee.
Yeah, and I would just say that we want to be as proactive as possible in pursuing policies that we think are good for Michigan's economy and free enterprise in the state. So we hope to be able to do more of that. I think our message to lawmakers has been, let's work together before a bill drops or before a bill is introduced. When that happens, you do force us to react. And so we would much rather work with you ahead of time and put good policy in place and work together on that. But that being said, we have a number of regulatory barriers we want to see addressed, and so we're looking forward to getting through this budget season, working through the summer, and seeing the legislature reconvene in the fall and get some stuff done.
All right. Well, thank you all. I remember to visit michamber.com. You can sign up for information alerts. You can check out the legislative priorities, and we have something called Key Bills and Issues, which is all the kind of the hot topics that the Michigan Chamber is tracking and working on. So, again, special thanks to Wendy, Mike, and Leah, and to you all for listening. Make sure to turn on to our next episode. Until then.